To dig deeper into today's topic, we'll be talking with our expert, Quinn Norton. Quinn is a writer who likes to hang out in the dead-end alleys and rough neighborhoods of the internet. She's been published in Wired, The Atlantic, Salon, amongst many others as an expert. Quinn, so what is tracking in your words, and why should people care about it?
Tracking can mean a lot of different things. Essentially, at its core, it's identifying someone or a cohort of someone's for some amount of time and attaching attributes to them. And that's very abstract. But sometimes it can mean we know that you're in Los Angeles right now. And so we're tracking that you are in Los Angeles. As you go through the internet, we still know that you are in Los Angeles. And so since you're in Los Angeles, we will feed you ads that are relevant to Los Angeles. I mean, that's the use of tracking in a lot of cases, is the ad service, and it's the main one that comes up these days. So when you say tracking, it can mean so many different things, from literally tracking every move you make on your cell phone to identifying the place you're in as you visit different sites or go to different places physically while carrying your phone. From the beginning, tracking is kind of a neutral activity. I always think of like that first beat of human care is I'll keep an eye on you. But like I'll keep an eye on you can be comforting, it can be scary, it can be weird. And when your computer and your internet connection and your phone are saying, I'll keep an eye on you, sometimes, again, that can be comforting. It can be nice to know that your location is being reported to your family or something like that. But it can also take on other overtones. So one of the reasons why I find the idea of, say, corporations keeping track of us a little concerning is, what's their motivation for keeping track of us? Well, usually it's because we are a resource for them, a source of money or information that they can use to make more money and get more information. Why is that a problem? It's not just about being served relevant ads. It's about making you into a person those ads are relevant to in many ways. So it isn't just that your profile information and your tracking information changes what ads you see. And for years, people have said, I don't click on ads. It doesn't matter what I see. But they'll also change what kind of content you see. Are you going to see stories that challenge your views or reinforce your views, or slowly work your views into something else? Because we're constantly making ourselves out of the media that we consume, whether you're watching TV shows or reading books or looking at stuff on the internet. It's giving you ideas. It's giving you perspectives on the world. It's giving you news and the way you feel about the news.
So the FTC has a broad set of rules and laws put in place over the last many years regarding protecting people's data. And now this conversation is obviously picking up steam, let's just say. Do you think that those laws that exist right now address any of these issues with online user data tracking? And do you think that with these current discussions going on in DC about privacy laws, et cetera, do you think anything is going to come of that?
Well, I live in GDPR land. The GDPR has not been super effective in accomplishing all this, but I still support it because I don't think you solve these problems overnight. And I think it's a step in the right direction. But will Washington solve it anytime soon? No. It's just too new and too complicated a project for them to kind of take on instantaneously like that. Part of the problem is that our culture has not really caught up to our technology. And always, to some degree, the solution to that is education more than legislation. For one thing, people in Washington don't know this stuff. This isn't what they do. And my hope is that we can do more to educate them. But ultimately, you need a net literate, educated populace to have a good internet. I wish I had an easier answer. I think everybody wants a legislation or policy answer, when the answer is people just need to know how to deal with online life. And we haven't had the internet for very long. It isn't, I mean, it's part of our culture, but it's not really part of our understanding. Digital literacy is kind of where literacy was maybe 120 years ago. And the answer to that wasn't make everything simpler for people who can't read. The answer was teach everyone how to read. And we did that. Actually, one of the most amazing flips in human history is that we went from about a 20% literacy to about 80% literacy in the span of roughly 100 years. And that's an impressive number, but it's even more impressive when you look at the population growth in the same time. It's a J curve of people who learn to read. As much as I am incredibly happy that you're teaching people about tracking and why it matters, I also think that this is something that we need to teach broadly. Everyone needs to know this stuff if we're actually going to have the kind of agency on the internet that we demand in our political spheres.
So you mentioned GDPR, and we've also got the California Consumer Privacy Act, which was passed recently. And like a huge part of all of these is the user privacy. Do you think that these have worked, or these are just like a starting point? Do you think they actually address any of the issues that we had with privacy?
I think they're a starting point. I absolutely think they're a starting point. There's things to criticize about the GDPR, and I do, as well as in the California law is wonderful for the US and also way too weak and not completely fit for purpose. But I also understand that like you can't get to the right political choices without popular consciousness about those. Now we are getting there slowly but surely. I think more people are concerned with tracking than they were 5-10 years ago. You know, when I was talking about how the internet could track you, people thought I was kind of crazy. But now I'm almost in the reverse position where people are like, your phone is listening to you all the time. And I'm like, your phone is not listening to you all the time. And they're like, you're a dupe. And your phone isn't listening to you all the time. The battery would run out if it was trying to. Like physics just says no. But that said, like your phone doesn't have to listen to you all the time. If it knows where you are, and if your phone is working, it knows where you are. And it can see, say, Google queries from people who are in the same location as you. It can serve you ads about that. And suddenly it can look like somebody who Googled something you were just talking about was your phone listening to you. There's a lot of much more complicated and interesting ways to do this than that direct surveillance. I'm really glad people are worried about direct surveillance, but I want them to get that architecture in their minds. Like if your phone is working, it knows where you are because it has to in order to work. So that means phone companies have an endless bit of path data that shows everywhere you move around. Now, that is the kind of tracking that could be very dangerous, but it's also the kind of tracking that makes modern life doable.
So with GDPR and asking people or companies to say, hey, you have to present the cookies transparently, right? And so I don't see any change of habit on my side, because I'm just going to click yes, like right away so that I can access the content, right? So
I am the weirdo who clicks no on the cookies and then submits.
Yeah, so I guess that's what they're doing with choice, but it hasn't really changed the user behavior or user knowledge, right?
And this is one of the ways GDPR is not successful, is that it's put too much onus on the user. You have to be that crazy person who will actually click through everything to turn off all the cookies. Right now, GDPR isn't in a position to address that. Although that kind of misses some of the point of GDPR, which is that a lot of the real teeth in GDPR has to do with how corporations and organizations manage the information they have and what they can do with it, as much as their interface with the user. So GDPR means that if you're going to keep information, you have to be careful about how or whether you share it. If you're going to try and offshore information, that can get real sticky real fast under GDPR rules.
What is fingerprinting?
So fingerprinting in the browser is a really specific process where you take characteristics about that browser and that user, and you make them into an ID. So the idea is if you move your mouse a certain way consistently, or you type at a certain speed, or it looks at like where your browser is coming from, what the version of the browser is, how you move your mouse around, all these things, they can get more and more unique the configuration of your computer, how fast it runs, what kind of browser you're using. You start combining all these things and you eventually get something highly unique like a fingerprint out of that. So by fingerprinting, instead of using something like a cookie, which just sets an ID on your computer, you can get something that might be more persistent and more identifying than a cookie over time. There's a lot of kind of back and forth between people trying to do fingerprinting, people trying to defeat fingerprinting, browser makers, for instance, who are trying to prevent people from being taken advantage of. It's a security issue as well. Everyone pretty much can be browser fingerprinted. So despite me using a whole bunch of privacy protecting software, the fact that I use privacy protecting software would be part of the fingerprint that would be used to track me.
That's what I was thinking about with this news by Google that they want to get rid of cookies. And for me, in my head,
so real quick, they don't want to get rid of cookies. That would make the web impossible to use. They want to get rid of third-party cookies. And a third-party cookie is specifically when a server that's not involved between you and the people you're talking to gets to put a cookie on your machine and understand the session that you're having right then. Like a cookie is just a little piece of data that sits on your machine, and another server writes it or reads it. And that doesn't sound like much, but that allows them to kind of like tag you. If you think about it, it's almost like a naturalist. They can tag you and follow you in the wild via a cookie. The main use, the first party cookie, not the third party cookie, the main use of cookies when they were invented, and I was around, it was really cool. We were really happy about it, is that it lets you log into things. Like you couldn't log into anything before they invented the cookie. And that was the initial purpose, was so that you could have a persistent relationship with a website.
So so third-party cookies and Safari and Firefox apparently got rid of them a while back. My question is, why is Google doing it now? What's the significance and how will that change things?
The main use of third-party cookies at this point in kind of the web ecosystem is as tracking for advertising, or tracking for other forms of tracking, advertising, data collection, so on and so forth. Neither Safari nor Firefox or even Microsoft Edge are made by an advertising company, whereas Chrome is. Chrome is Google, and Google is in the business of selling ads. So they are in a really interesting position where they can't get rid of third-party cookies on the face of it because they're vital for ad metrics in order to sell their product. But third-party cookies are not popular because they're used to exploit people, and that's pretty much their only use. So at that point, what they want to do, Google wants to get rid of this unpopular thing, but keep the functionality that they had. And so what they're doing is they're kind of using something that's a little bit like browser fingerprinting. It's not exactly, but they're basically using a few different factors in the browser to create an ID. And they're attaching certain attributes to that ID. And this is called flock. And they're going to use that instead of the third-party cookie to sell their ads. Now, this gets really complicated. The problems with this are really interesting. The first problem with this is that it kind of locks the ad world into Chrome. So it's a way of creating an ad system that reinforces Google's monopoly in a way that I think under almost any reading of monopoly law is illegal. So they're specifically creating a tech barrier to anyone trying to use Chrome and serve ads outside of their ecosystem. Now, you could say they just create that tech barrier by getting rid of third-party cookies in the first place, which other browsers have done. But they're basically coming up with an alternative that locks in advertisers in a way that it's not a level playing field with the other browsers or the other sources of advertising. So I've seen estimates that like it'll bring down advertising revenue for media companies and so on and so forth. I mean, I have very complicated feelings about whether or not media companies should be participating in surveillance capitalism anyway. But The other thing, the more I was looking, we'd have to see the specs on Flock to be sure, but I think there's another really interesting thing Google might be going after, especially if Facebook has gotten a lot of flack, and so is YouTube and so on and so forth, about what content they direct to whom. And Flock, because it kind of blinds this process more than a cookie does, kind of gives Google a little plausible deniability, where they're kind of like wrapping this, they're kind of creating this little package of attributes and selling this like blinded package of attributes to advertisers. And so if they are then pushing conspiracy content to vulnerable people, they can kind of say, it was just a hash. We didn't know what it was doing. It's the advertiser's fault. So like Facebook kind of can't do that because they're a little bit more woven in, like they have a content moderation problem, but Google can kind of be like, no harm, no foul. We just do a hash and sell it by the hash. We don't know that much. We don't know that much about the people we're selling. We've anonymized it. And so we're not responsible. And, that may not be true in the final analysis, but they haven't released the documentation that would tell us whether or not they're trying to write themselves a get out of jail free card on bad content and abusive content. Although, given Google's history, I would keep an eye out for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Quinn, for your time and for explaining these really difficult concepts.